Imagine a society where justice isn't just about right and wrong, but also about who you are and where you stand in the social hierarchy, a place where the same crime could lead to vastly different punishments depending on your status. Welcome to ancient Rome, a civilization celebrated for its contributions to art, politics, and military prowess, yet notorious for a justice system that was as brutal as it was complex. We often romanticize the Roman Empire, picturing grand amphitheaters, philosophical debates, and monumental architecture. However, beneath this veneer of civilization lay a legal framework designed to instill fear, maintain order, and reinforce societal divisions. From public executions to punishments so bizarre they defy belief, the Romans had a penchant for turning justice into a public spectacle. So prepare yourself as we embark on a journey through the darker corridors of Roman history. We'll uncover the methods and motivations behind ancient Rome's most infamous punishments, shedding light on a system that prioritized deterrence over rehabilitation. Crime and order in the heart of the empire. At its zenith, Rome was a sprawling metropolis teeming with over 1 million inhabitants. The city's narrow streets buzzed with activity, from merchants peddling their wares to politicians making deals in the shadows. But with such density came inevitable disorder. Theft, fraud, and public disturbances were commonplace, challenging the authorities to maintain control. Unlike modern cities equipped with organized police forces, Rome relied on a combination of officials to keep the peace. The Vigils, a group of about 7,000 men, primarily functioned as firefighters, but also served as night watchmen, addressing minor infractions and apprehending petty criminals. For more severe threats, the Praetorian Guard, elite soldiers tasked with protecting the emperor, and the urban cohorts, a paramilitary force, were deployed to suppress riots and enforce order. Yet despite these measures, the sheer size and diversity of Rome meant that maintaining law and order was a constant struggle. This challenge led to the implementation of harsh and often public punishments designed to deter would-be offenders and demonstrate the might of Roman justice. Justice and social stratification. In Rome, justice was not blind. The application of the law heavily depended on one's social standing. Roman society was stratified into distinct classes: the elite patricians, the common plebeians, freedmen, slaves, and foreigners. This hierarchy influenced every aspect of life, including legal proceedings and punishments. For Roman citizens, especially those of higher status, penalties for crimes were often less severe. They might face fines, temporary exile, or property confiscation. In contrast, slaves, non-citizens, and the impoverished, collectively known as humiliores, were subjected to far harsher treatments. The rationale was clear: maintaining the existing social order required visibly punishing those at the bottom to deter dissent and rebellion. This duality in the justice system underscored the Romans' belief that societal stability hinged on reinforcing class distinctions, even within the realm of law and order. Corporal punishments and public humiliation. For minor offenses, especially among the lower classes and slaves, corporal punishment was a common recourse. Flogging, or flagellatio, was widespread. Offenders were stripped and beaten with rods or whips, sometimes in public forums, serving both as punishment and as a warning to onlookers. Slaves, considered property under Roman law, bore the brunt of such punishments. Their masters wielded near-absolute authority over them, meting out beatings for perceived slights or infractions. A particularly humiliating punishment involved forcing a slave to carry a furca, a heavy wooden yoke, around their neck while parading through the streets, signaling their disgrace to all. These acts of public humiliation were not just punitive, but also performative, reinforcing societal hierarchies and the power dynamics inherent within Roman culture. Executions designed for maximum suffering. When crimes were deemed severe, the Romans did not shy away from executions, often ensuring they were as public and painful as possible to serve as deterrents. Crucifixion stands out as one of the most infamous methods. Reserved primarily for slaves, rebels, and non-citizens, the condemned were first scourged and then nailed or tied to a wooden cross. Left to hang under the scorching sun, death could take days, with the suffering individual exposed to the elements and scavenging birds. The public nature of crucifixion amplified its terror, serving as a grim reminder of the state's power. Another gruesome method was burning alive, sometimes utilizing the tunica molesta. This garment was soaked in flammable substances and ignited while the wearer was bound, leading to an agonizing death. Such punishments were often reserved for arsonists or those who committed particularly heinous crimes. Sack of horrors, the dreadful Poena Cullei. Among Rome's array of punishments, the Poena Cullei stands out for its macabre creativity. This penalty was specifically designated for parricide, the act of killing one's parent or close relative. The convicted individual was first flogged, then sewn into a large leather sack alongside a collection of live animals, typically a dog, a snake, a rooster, and an ape. Once secured, the sack was cast into a river or the sea, ensuring a terrifying and certain death. The symbolism behind the inclusion of these particular animals remains a topic of historical debate, but the punishment's intent was clear: to exact retribution in a manner as horrifying as the crime itself. Military discipline and the feared decimation. Discipline within the Roman legions was stringent, with severe consequences for collective misconduct. One of the most dreaded forms of military punishment was decimation. When a unit was found guilty of cowardice, mutiny, or dereliction of duty, they were subjected to this brutal practice. Soldiers were divided into groups of 10, and lots were drawn. The unfortunate soldier who drew the marked lot was then executed by his 9 comrades, often beaten to death. This harsh measure served to instill discipline and deter future insubordination, emphasizing the collective responsibility of the unit. Slavery and the absence of rights. Slavery was deeply entrenched in Roman society, with slaves constituting a significant portion of the population. As property, slaves had no legal rights, and their masters exercised near total control over their lives. Punishments for slaves were severe and often public. Branding, mutilation, and extreme physical chastisements were common. For serious offenses, slaves could be condemned to fight as gladiators or be executed in public arenas, serving as both punishment and public entertainment. One particularly horrific policy involved mass executions. If a slave killed their master, intentionally or not, all the household slaves could be put to death. The most infamous example occurred in 61 AD when a Roman senator was murdered by one of his slaves. Despite public protest, Emperor Nero ordered the execution of all 400 of his slaves, emphasizing that Roman law saw them as complicit by mere association. This brutal collective punishment served a chilling purpose: to instill absolute fear and obedience among the enslaved population. It also revealed just how deeply Rome's legal system dehumanized entire groups to preserve elite power. Murder as matinee, death in the arena. Now, imagine walking into a stadium with 50,000 cheering spectators, not for a sports game, but to witness people being torn apart by wild animals. Welcome to damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Held in amphitheaters like the Colosseum, this form of capital punishment turned execution into entertainment. Criminals, prisoners of war, Christians, and political enemies were thrown into the arena with lions, leopards, bears, or even elephants. Sometimes the victims were armed. Usually they weren't. It was blood-soaked theater. These events were carefully staged, often accompanied by dramatic music and commentary, making death part of the empire's propaganda machine. The message? Rome is powerful, and defying it means dying horribly, in front of a roaring crowd. Even more disturbing, sometimes the executions were staged as mythological reenactments. One man might be dressed as Icarus, only to be thrown off a platform to his death. Another might play Hercules, only to be torn apart by wild animals while bound to a burning stake. In ancient Rome, dying wasn't just a consequence, it was a performance. Twisted ingenuity. As if Rome's standard punishments weren't brutal enough, there were others so bizarre they sound almost mythical, but they were real. Let's talk about molten metal. Yes, in some rare cases, traitors or those guilty of extreme greed were forced to swallow molten gold or lead. This punishment was symbolic as much as it was fatal. The message? You wanted riches? Choke on them. Then there's the gruesome tale of the honey torture, allegedly used by Emperor Domitian. A person would be smeared with honey and tied down in the sun, usually near a stagnant body of water. They were left to be devoured by insects, slowly, and alive. The worst part? Victims could survive for days, even weeks, in unimaginable agony. While not all historians agree on the frequency of these punishments, they appear in ancient sources as examples of the lengths Roman rulers would go to instill terror and show off their absolute control. Legacy of Roman law. With all this brutality, you might be surprised to learn that Roman law wasn't just about punishment. It also laid the foundation for many principles in modern legal systems. Romans introduced key concepts like innocent until proven guilty, the right to a fair trial, and legal contracts. The 12 Tables, Rome's earliest code of laws, and later the Justinian Code, heavily influenced European legal traditions for centuries. However, the legacy of Roman justice is a double-edged sword. While it pioneered critical legal ideas, it also showed how justice could be warped into a tool for control and spectacle. The Roman Empire didn't just want to punish you, it wanted to make an example out of you. So, after everything you've heard, which punishment would you least want to face? Crucifixion under a burning sun? Sewn into a sack with a monkey and a snake? Or maybe turned into a human torch for Nero's garden party? Drop your pick in the comments. And hey, if you made it through this video without wincing at least once, you might just be tough enough to survive ancient Rome. But just maybe, don't try stealing bread in the forum. If you found this dive into Roman justice fascinating and a little terrifying, give us a like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next trip through history's darkest moments. Up next, the punishment systems of ancient Greece and Egypt. Spoiler alert, they weren't much kinder. Thanks for watching, and may your toga parties be historically accurate, but significantly less fatal.